Good morning, or it's morning my time anyway. I've been invited today to talk to you about some of the macroeconomic implications of empowering women and giving them access to equal economic participation. I'm going to give particular attention to the impact of the pandemic, but I'm going to stick to fairly large issues that will have major implications for recovery and rebound going forward. I think it's important to begin with underlining how significant the contribution of women to global well-being already is. I think many people have a tendency to assume, just based on traditional common sense, that that women's contribution is small and that their full participation is a nice to have and not a must have, and I'm going to try to convince you otherwise. First of all, it's really important to know that already women contribute approximately 37 to 40% of global GDP. I want to emphasize that that's a global average and that it is substantially understated because of the influence on the average of countries such as India and regions such as the Middle East, where women's economic participation and labor force engagement in particular is utilized. The evidence at this point, the macroeconomic analysis has been done so far, shows that women's, particularly female labor force participation, is a major source of growth. This has not only been true in the developed nations, where the record between 1970 and about 2010 showed that the growth in female labor force participation was a major driver. It's what basically made those nations rich. At this point, we have evidence covering approximately 163 countries around the world that show that this is a phenomenon that can be documented in both developed and developing countries, and that therefore it offers an important strategy for causing growth in those countries. From the point of view of the pandemic, however, with women contributing to that degree to global GDP, it's important to recognize that it is irresponsible, ill-advised, and even foolish to be making economic recovery plans from the pandemic without addressing a very large section of the world population that is already a huge factor in economic life. From the point of view of economic development, it's also important to understand that the overwhelming impact of evidence at this point shows that the impact of women's economic participation across the board has a negative impact, a massively negative impact, both on human well-being around the world, but also both family and national prosperity. In particular, we can show at this point that women's inequality in the world economy produces poverty. It is also a major contributor to world hunger and food insecurity, which will be a key element in the post-pandemic recovery. They already produce more than half the world's food. Violence of all kinds, we can show now, is significantly increased. And I will point out to you that violence of all kinds is not only a horrible contributor to human suffering, but it is also a major economic drag. The impact of excluding females from education and economic participation also contributes to a number of things that initially were counterintuitive, including increased disease and even civil conflict. I want to go ahead and point out to you, for those who work in these areas, that there is a new summary of the evidence available through USAID. You can find it online, and the title of it is Gender Inequality Causes Poverty. This is an important step for them to be taking. It is an assembly of and summary of all the available evidence. And the conclusion, an important conclusion for a group with that kind of influence, is that gender inequality is a global scourge. It is a structural factor, and it is causal to poverty. So there is no way we're going to address poverty if we don't address gender inequality in a very specific way. Now, let me give you an example of how that's happening right now. At the moment, a number of factory girls in India have been pushed out of work. And as many of you will anticipate, knowing the cultural practices in India, they have been forced eventually to return to their villages because they have no income. And what this will inevitably mean, because they are mostly single young women, is that they will be essentially forced to get married. Arrangements will be made for them to marry, whether they choose freely to marry or not. What this means is that India will lose an entire generation of workers. And in addition, it will contribute to, as I said, hunger, violence. It will hurt the well-being of children. And as a result, it will cause a major humanitarian crisis as well. This is something that will be happening in other countries besides India, where the expectations for marriage are similar, and that is much of the world. And it's something that needs specific attention, as I said, both for economic recovery issues and also for humanitarian questions. What we see here is an example of something that is pervasive across the world, and that is where we have traditional gender burdens causing economic distress. It's important to understand that the kinds of issues that women's advocacy groups have pushed for, such as cessation of gender-based violence and reproductive freedoms, also, all of them have major economic repercussions, and economic negative impact will not be countered until those things are reduced. But I would make an argument that around the world, in both the developed and the developing nations, the evidence shows that consistently the largest, most impactful force for exclusion is the lack of availability of childcare. What we need is a universal, affordable, high-quality system that is accessible to all women, regardless of their national origin or their current economic and family standing. The evidence indicates, and several countries have done studies of this already, that the increase in growth that comes from the number of women that return to or enter into the labor force because of available childcare more than pays for itself. There is no reason to continue to whine that it is too expensive for nations to invest in. This is simply not true. In addition, there is also no evidence at this point in time that women engaged in work and in the economy negatively affects children and families. In fact, at this point, we have 50 years of data studying approximately a third of the countries around the world that shows that there is no difference in childhood outcomes between children whose mothers work and those who don't. In fact, as adults, these are people who benefit, who measurably have improved lives, both as workers and as parents and spouses. So this is something that, should the world choose to make this investment, we can see social as well as economic benefits. There's a lot of talk continues that it is somehow not natural for women not to stay home. I just want to jump in here and say that the scientific information that is available says that we are the kind of primate that shares care, not only among females, but between males and females. There is no case to be made that there is a natural origin or a natural benefit for women to remain secluded when they're mothers. In addition, the impact on family livelihoods is important to understand. I think it's fairly obvious that if both the male and the female in a household of that composition are economically active and bringing an income, that family livelihoods increase, and therefore the resources available to develop children and therefore human capital going forward are increased. In addition, it gives them a security that helps them to weather emergencies and disasters. It helps them to be able to save money that allow them to go forward into the future and make plans, as well as to, as I said, to have resilience in the case of a downturn. Finally, it is also really important to recognize at this point that at this point in time in the universities and post-secondary educational institutions around the world, that females are more likely to be enrolled by a long shot than males. It averages, I think, about 30% more around the world. Some places in the Middle East, you'll see countries where it's several 100% more. What this means from a national economic point of view is that nations, whole societies have made a massive investment in female education at the university level. And that means that their best resource in terms of human capital right now and going forward is female. So to waste that resource going forward is going to hurt national competitiveness, and it will retard growth significantly. There is no reason to be throwing this resource away so wantonly. So this is something that is very important to start attending to, is to facilitate the entry and advancement of those educated women into the labor force and to allow them to maintain and sustain their participation over the course of their entire lifetimes. Of course, there is still a great deal to be done to pull girls through secondary school. This is also a major contributor. Lots of progress is being made on that. And that, of course, is a different aspect, a different segment of economies than the tertiary education one, but both need significant attention. What hurts women in terms of keeping them from being able to participate once they've been educated, either at the secondary or the tertiary level, is that they are unable to work full time. We need to be more skeptical about the numbers that we see about female labor force participation very often. A large number, like a 65 to 70% participation, masks a very significant number of part-time workers among females. This is a significant contributor to pay inequality, and it is a major inefficiency in economic organization. So what we need to be looking at is to rethink particularly childcare as a systemic form of economic infrastructure. It is not a luxury spending item for women who ought to be staying at home anyway. This is something that, just like building roads and building airports, nations need to look at as a long-term investment in economic well-being. It is not a nice to have, it is a must-have. To end then, I do want to make it clear that all the things that I have just outlined are gender-specific issues, and they must be addressed with gender-specific solutions. And that means that it is not acceptable for governments or NGOs or international agencies to be making the argument that if they help all people, or if they help the poor as a general category, that they will also help women. That is simply not the case. It basically replicates the gender system when you do that. And so we all have to be pulling together to address the systemic factors that cause gender inequality in economies. Thank you.